A Kenyan man has pled not guilty in a US court this week to trafficking illegal ivory and also rhino horn. Mansour Mohammed Serra was part of an international conspiracy responsible for the slaughter of more than 100 elephants and dozens of rhinos, according to federal prosecutors in New York, and allegedly amounts to an estimated $7.4 million amassed over 7 years. Now, some exports were hidden inside pieces of art, such as African masks and statues, according to the court documents, and money was paid to and from foreign customers by international wire transfers, some of which were sent through US financial institutions. No background checks on those people. And Mr. Serra was arrested in the Kenyan city of Mombasa and extradited to the US to face trial in New York, and he also faces charges of money laundering and drug dealing. He and 3 others, Amara Sharif of Guinea, Mo Azua Kroma of Liberia, and Abdi Hussein Ahmed of Kenya, are accused of agreeing illegal ivory sales with buyers in Manhattan, as well as others in Southeast Asia. It's funny those two places come up the same with a story like this. But whilst I applaud the arrest of these people who cause animals to suffer or die, I fail to see why the purchasers are not arrested as well and charged with the same crime. If there was no market for these items, there would be less of these people doing this stuff. And in my opinion, the buyers are equally, if not more, responsible than the ones who carried it out. Yet again, these Richie Riches are getting away, asking for these things, offering lots of money, and other people who are struggling for money end up doing wrong things, and they pay the price, but not them. I said this in a show a number of years ago. We have to generate more business opportunities for the Africans to stop people doing this, where they're forced into slavery, trafficking and drugs as their only avenue to generate income. Everyone has to get by, but not everyone should have the same opportunity to do a worthwhile, non-illegal job also. And whilst that's going on, and the world's suffering, and people are forced into slavery, trafficking, drugs, and all kinds of other prostitution, etc., then we have this club of greed-based psychopaths. And one wonders why the leader of every bank has not stopped or cut off the funding to these people. The billionaires' wealth grew so much in the past 9 months that they could cut every man, woman and child in America a $3,000 stimulus check and still be richer than they were 9 months ago. 330 million times 3,000 and still be richer. According to the ATF Executive Director Frank Clemente in a press release on Tuesday, the report tracked the Fat Cat's profits from March 18th, which was 3 days before martial law was declared, remember, and they knew, the approximate start date of the economic shutdowns, of course it was, through December the 5th. So we're nearly 2 months further down the line now, and they've made more money since. And the vast majority accelerated their accumulation of wealth, even as ordinary Americans saw their life savings slip through their fingers, losing jobs, businesses and loved ones to the 1-2 punch of the coronavirus and the political response. And after 9 months of raking in the cash, the billionaires' total wealth has soared 36% to over $4 trillion. Nearly twice the $2.1 trillion in wealth held by the poorest 50% of Americans. $4 trillion. And the monstrous cash pile amounts to double the 2-year budget gap of all state and all local governments, and a figure estimated to reach $500 billion thanks to the devastating effects of the economic shutdowns on tax revenues. All those stimulus checks that went out, or the few or half of which to Americans went out, are all going to be demanded back by state and local governments in increased taxes. Why? Because nobody's paying them, or very few are. It even approaches the massive sum the federal government spends on Medicare and Medicaid, $644 billion and $389 billion respectively in 2019, while most working and middle-class Americans received a single stimulus payment of $1,200 as part of the March's CARE Act. The promised second stimulus check had failed to materialise from July onwards until after the election, and then it became a political grandstanding item. Now, the expanded unemployment program that doled out $600 per week to newly jobless Americans, that came to an end in July also, and while President Trump issued an executive order to bridge the gap with a less general $300 weekly payment, debts mounted up, whilst these greedy bastards just kept on counting. And one of the chief beneficiaries of the fiscal explosion has been Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, whose personal fortune increased 63% since March, as Americans were then forced to turn to online shopping to meet their needs. You would think it was all part of the plan. Well, it was. And we warned of this several times last year, but it's nice to see others in the alternative community focusing on the shit show that these greed-based harvesters have deliberately engineered for themselves. They should be run out of the country. And the leader of every bank should suspend all of their accounts. Because, in essence, what they're doing is money laundering. Because they knew. Leon Black, who founded the Apollo Global Management Inc. 3 decades ago in the aftermath of one scandal, is retiring as chief executive in the aftermath of another scandal, this one involving the notorious sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Just months after Apollo announced an internal investigation into Black's long association with the allegedly late financier, the investment firm said on a statement on Monday that he would retire as CEO no later than July the 31st and would remain chairman. Now, Mark Rowan, one of Black's top lieutenants, will succeed him as the CEO. And in a statement, Apollo said, an outside law firm hired to conduct the review found that Apollo never retained Epstein for any services, and that Epstein never invested in any Apollo-managed funds. The law firm Deckert also found no evidence that Black was involved in any way with Epstein's criminal activities at any time. Really? So because Deckert, who no one knows who they are, said that was the case, we all have to believe them. Is that how it really works? Now, one of Deckert's lead people was Henry Nassau. Yes, that name will be familiar, which has links back to the House of Orange. And what this tells me about this management group is they are connected to Mossad and ISIS, which is Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, just like Epstein was. Epstein was a sexual blackmail entrapment program. And one look at the Wikipedia description of this Apollo group tells you all that is wrong in the world of finance. A pure greed-based harvesting group, and they and a bunch of other vulture, not venture capitalists. And all of it needs breaking up if this planet is ever going to correct itself. The Apollo group, predictably headquartered out of New York, Black, born 2, Rowan, also born 2, third leader of the group, Joshua Harris, also born 2, fourth is Tony Ressler, also born 2. And the great question is, what is wrong with that culture of pure greed and harvesting? Australia, we're off to next. More harvesting, more dodgy deals, and yet again a familiar connection. And Australia has approved at least 14 permits for the export of military goods to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates over the last year and a half, despite their involvement in the Yemen conflict, which has created a humanitarian crisis. And the Department of Defence has also revealed it has approved permits for $580,000 of military goods to Turkey since late 2019, even though the Defence Minister, Linda Reynolds, announced a pause of such exports at that time because of concerns the country's incursion into the northeast Syria was causing great civilian suffering. These people don't care about people suffering. Let's just get the money in. And the latest figures have prompted calls for the Australian government to show more transparency. That's a laugh. In the ways it discloses exports of weapons and other military goods which are shrouded in secrecy. Well, for the people of Australia, you can thank ASIO and Pine Gap for that secrecy. Not to mention ISIS also. And it is deeply disturbing that our government could allow weapons to be sold to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who the UN has said are responsible for breaches of international humanitarian law, including the killing of children in Yemen, according to the Chief Executive of Save the Children Australia, Paul Reynolds. The government has not released information about the particular equipment that has been exported, arguing such details were commercial in confidence. But it said such goods can include weapons and munitions, but also armour, radios, simulators, that's an interesting term that is, and training equipment which are not necessarily for a military purpose. Yeah, right. You know why they did this? To help the Israelis again. That is where all these arms deals leads back to. And yes, that's another bit of intel. With Israel already having Saudi Arabia in its puppet pack, and recently the United Arab Emirates did a deal formalising relations with Israel, well, now you know why that treaty went ahead. Go Ogle, and we're still in Australia, has threatened to remove its search engine from Australia over the nation's attempt to make the tech giants share royalties with news publishers. And it's Australia's introduction of world first law to make Go Ogle, Facebook and potentially other tech companies pay media outlets for their news content. But the US firms have fought back, warning the law would make them withdraw some of their services. Ooh, let's all shit our pants because Go Ogle and Facebook is going away. No. And the Australian Crime Minister Scott Morrison said lawmakers would not yield to threats. Now, Australia is far from Go Ogle's largest market, but the proposed news code is seen as a possible global test case for how governments could seek to regulate big tech firms. And these tech firms have faced increasing pressure to pay for the news content in other countries, including France, where Go Ogle struck a landmark deal with media outlets last Thursday. But in Australia, the proposed news code would tie Go Ogle and Facebook to mediate negotiations with publishers over the value of news content if no agreement could be reached first. No wonder Go Ogle and don't want to pay. Because what the news outlets don't know, Go Ogle is a subsidiary of the CIA. The CIA, like Reuters, which is also connected to the CIA, are the very people who create the news content for the news publishers. That's why they won't do it. Why would they pay for their own content? Because all the major news outlets all comes from agency script writers, of which Go Ogle are one of them. Now, the Go Ogle Australian Managing Director Mel Silver told the Senate hearing on Friday that the laws were unworkable. If this version of the code were to become law, it would give us no real choice but to stop making Go Ogle search available in Australia. Now, the Australian news industry is struggling. Of every 100 Australian dollars spent on digital advertising, 81% of, or 81 Australian dollars, goes to Go Ogle and Facebook. Nice little earner they've got for themselves there. 81% of all digital advertising goes to Go Ogle and Facebook. Do I sense a common sense solution coming along here? And they say that COVID-19 has only made this worse, with companies reducing their digital advertising spend. A number of outlets in Australia have been forced to close. Go Ogle, by contrast, has been performing well, and last year the social media giant made almost $4 billion from Australia, whilst paying only $45 million in tax. Meanwhile, Australia's competition watchdog has accused both Facebook and Go Ogle of misleading Australian consumers about how their data is used, launching inquiries into digital advertising and the app stores market. And yes, here's the common sense solution. Why are Australian prime ministers and governments messing around with these people? Just ban Go Ogle in every country. It's that simple. We don't need their input into our internet experience. Riddled with data mining, harvesting, spying and adverts. Please tell me which consumer actually wants any of those experiences. So why do we need it? Just delete it.